Hi everyone, my name is Orphea and welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be a video with tips on how to sell on Etsy. Now before we get into the tips, I wanted to give you a tiny bit of background on myself and my experience selling on Etsy. Now I've been making jewelry and alternative accessories ever since 2012 and started selling them on Etsy in 2014. Now at the early stages I sold mainly patches, I sold hair bows with like eyeballs on them, and then I also started making actual jewelry to sell on there, and ever since I started making nose to ear chains, that's when my Etsy store took off, and I have been selling on Etsy ever since. The first thing you have to do is decide what you want to sell. This might sound really simple, but it can be a little more difficult for some people. Now Etsy has three categories in which you can sell items. The first one, in which I personally fall, are crafts. So this is anything handmade. This can be art prints, it can be jewelry, this can be modified t-shirts, etc. So the first category, crafts, which is everything that is handmade. The second category is craft supplies. Now these can be chains, this can be paint, this can be fabric, this can be anything to make crafts. And then finally, the third category is a vintage. Now vintage can have a very wide variety of meanings. It can be vintage clothing, vintage furniture, it's also vintage music, it can be a lot of things, but anything with the label vintage. And if you want to sell vintage, you have to select the time period that it comes from. Now my biggest tip to when you decide what you want to sell is to keep it cohesive and have an assortment of things to sell. If you only have one item on your Etsy, it is very unlikely that people will find it and actually make a purchase through your Etsy store. Unless you have one item that is very customizable, I think it's highly unlikely. I personally started making bows and creepy things so that fit into the gothic aesthetic. If, for example, you want to make phone cases, you could also consider having laptop cases or tablet cases. So you can make an assortment based on what you want to sell, but don't make 100 million things because it's going to be too overwhelming for people. What is also very important is that you have quality items. If people buy something from you, you have to make it worth their money, and because it is handmade, I think it is very important that it is quality. And something that has grown more popularity over the years is also customizable items. People want to be able to give their own touch to what you are selling. So for example, my nose to ear chains, I can vary them in length. So if someone wants a very long nose to ear chain, I can make that for them. If someone wants to combine nose to ear chains, I can also do that, and I'm always open to requests. And I think that's very important if you have an Etsy store, that your product is quality and is also customizable for your buyers. Tip number 2 is go and have a peek at the competition. If you've decided what you want to sell, type it into Etsy and see what is already there. For example, if you type in nose to ear chains, you will see that there's not a lot of pages. If you type in bat necklace, you will see that there's a lot more of. And I think it's very important to have a look at the competition, first of all, to see if there's not an overload of people already selling the thing that you want to sell. Now, of course, if you can give a unique touch to the thing you are selling, that's something completely different. But if you are selling craft supplies, for example, make sure that there's not 100 million other stores selling the exact same craft supplies as well. And what I personally also do is always check the title and the description so that I have an idea of what I need to use as keywords afterwards into making my own listing as well. So for the title, I will look if they have any other words that they describe a nose to ear chain with, for example, or if they have a description that is more complete than mine, or if they have other options in their description. So I will always have a look every now and then at my competition on Etsy, because I don't see it as competition, I see it more as fellow sellers, but I will have a look what they do and what they are up to, etc., just to keep my own shop up to date as well. And I also look at my competition for my price setting. Now, to some of you this might be less important, but personally to me, I don't want to be the most expensive one out there selling nose to ear chains. It has two reasons. First of all, this is a hobby to me. I don't want to make enormous amounts of money on it. And the second one is I think this is something really easy and simple to make. It just looks very cool, and I'd rather sell it to people who can't afford the really expensive ones, so that's why my prices are somewhere in the middle range of nose to ear chains. Now, of course, when you first get started, you might want to ask a lower price for the items, and if you get more experience at making them, you can of course charge a higher price. Next, you want to think about your shop name. What are you going to call your Etsy store? Can you link it to your current social media, or are you going to make different social media accounts for it? Now, I personally use Orphea 333 everywhere, on my YouTube, on my Instagram, on my Twitter, on my Facebook. I use it everywhere, so it's very easy to find me. Just type in Orphea 333 and you will find me everywhere that I am. And it actually makes it very easy for me to link between my social media accounts. Now, if like me, you don't sell a lot, this might be a very good idea, but if you want to have dedicated accounts to the creation of your jewelry, to pictures of the jewelry, etc., or of the other things that you're selling, of course, it might be more interesting to have a dedicated account for your Etsy store on social media as well. I think it's very important to cross-promote on social media because it's one of the best ways to get found on Etsy. I think about half of my Etsy sales come as a redirection through Instagram or through my Facebook, which is massive if you consider how many people are on my social media. So I think it's a very good way to promote your items and your Etsy store. The next thing is the more technical aspect. It is actually making good listings. The first thing you want to do is pick a good title. Now, this has to contain search words. So if you would search for your item into the find bar, what would you type in? You have to make sure that those words are in your title and as well in your description. So when you make your title for a nose to ear chain, make sure that you include nose to ear chain. If it is a beaded nose to ear chain, include beaded nose to ear chain in your title. If it is a chain, you might include silver chain or black chain, because people might be looking for a black nose to ear chain, and if you don't have the word black in your title and in your description, they will be less likely to find it immediately in the search bar. Next is the description. Now, I've briefly touched on the description in the title as well. It is very important that you start with a good description of what you are selling. For example, this listing is for a beaded nose to ear chain made with quality parts for an alternative look, and make sure that you have the keywords like beaded nose to ear chain into the top of the description as well. Now, for me personally, I make custom items, and I always prefer if people see that I do custom listings before they actually see all the details of the different things I'm selling. So I'll always include at the top of my listing, if you want a custom-made item, please contact me before purchasing. Why is this important? Because at the start of my Etsy, I've had it a lot of times that people made a purchase and then afterwards contacted me because they wanted something different about it, which may or may not be possible. I've had to do some cancellations due to this because people didn't read the description. It's something very important to include in your description is also the size of the thing you are selling, for example, the length of the nose to ear chain, and if you do custom orders on these items, or if it is a ready-made piece. And then maybe the most important part of your listing are the pictures. Now, I always take at least 3 pictures of my items. The first picture is kind of more a close-up picture of the item being worn or in its natural environment, for example, a picture frame on a desk, etc., so that people have an idea how it looks and where it can sit, etc. The second picture I have is always a detail shot, so I do this mostly on a white piece of paper so people can very clearly see the details and maybe list some different options, etc. And then finally, I try to have at least one picture of the item being worn, like in a full outfit, etc. So the picture on its own, the details, and finally it being worn. Finally, when you're almost done with your listing, you have to include shipping information, so ship it well. What this means is think about how you're gonna ship it, what shipping method are you gonna use, and how much does it cost. Now, what I personally do is that I use stamps to send my little parcels which contain my nose to ear chains. So I charge a little bit for the envelope I'm using and I charge for the stamps I am using. If you're not sure, that you maybe take one of your parcels to the post office and ask them for the different rates and how is the best way to ship it. Now, I personally use bubble wrap envelopes for artwork. I know there's rolls that exist. If I have larger orders, I always have shipping boxes, like cardboard boxes, and I always bubble wrap my items if I don't have a bubble wrap envelope, or I put paper within it so that it's really well packaged. There's nothing worse than having someone buy your items and having it arrive broken, which I had unfortunately happen to some of my customers at the very early stages of my shop. And what I personally do then is just ship it again free of charge to them, because it was my fault that it wasn't shipped correctly or packaged properly, etc. And something you can also include, but is optional, are business cards and a thank you card. I used to always include a hand-printed thank you card, but I stopped doing it because I got too many orders and wasn't able to keep up with it. But I do always include at least 2 business cards in every single order, so that people know where it comes from, and if they want to buy more, they have your business card and can find your Etsy easily again. And then with this comes my final tip, and it is to include your customers. As I was mentioning, I always put a thank you card at the beginning of my Etsy store into my orders, and onto this thank you card I would ask them for feedback and for eventual pictures of my items being worn, and I would in return give them a discount on future orders. Now, once I've had a few pictures gathered from people wearing my jewelry, I stopped doing this thank you card system and just give the discount to every single customer after they first purchase something from my Etsy store. And then finally, some tips that I think speak for themselves, but I wanted to mention nonetheless. Be kind to your customers and potential customers. I've gotten a lot of messages on my Etsy store for people asking about explanations about my items or asking if something is still available, etc. And I will always be very nice to those people, because you have to keep in mind they have an interest in what you are selling and what you are doing, so there's no point in being rude. Now, some questions can be delicate to answer. For example, I've had someone asking me to send them the links of where I would purchase my supplies from. I've replied to that person that they can look up jewelry supplies on Etsy, that there's a lot of crafting supply stores that sell those items, but I never gave them the direct links to where I personally get my jewelry supplies from. I think, for example, that a question like that is not done, but most of the questions I get are from people who want to know if they have the right type of piercing to attach a nose to ear chain to, what's the difference between a clasp attachment and a jump ring attachment. So it's all basic questions about my items that I can answer rather quickly in the meantime, because I've gotten them a lot. Sometimes it's also for custom orders or for the eventual shipping times that could be there. So there's just a lot of questions that people can ask you on Etsy. Now, you might also get questions for free items and collaborations, etc. It's entirely up to you how you handle these. I personally do collaborations with some people, but most of them have already placed orders, or I will make a combined order for a slightly cheaper price than the items would have been separately. That's just personally how I do it. I don't often send things entirely for free unless it's a very good concept that I want to work with. Now, you might also get complaints on your Etsy, and this is something that you have to keep in mind as well. Now, personally, I work in complaint management at my current job, so I am used to handling complaints. For me, it's something I do on a daily basis. Now, for most complaints, if it is my fault or if I could have prevented it from happening, I will either refund the item or ship it again. Now, if it's something caused by the person buying it, for example, they haven't read the entire description, then it's entirely the customer's fault, and I will not send it again free of charge, etc. I will try and propose a solution that works for them and for me. And for example, I've had someone purchase a nose to ear chain from me. I sent it out after the 3 days that I had to create the item, and then when it was on its way for over a week already, they invoiced me, said me, hey, my address was wrong, can you still ship it to my current address? No, that's not possible. I cannot retrieve a package and send it again free of charge to you. So when the package returned to my address, I sent him a message telling him, well, there's a few options. First option, I can send it again and you just pay me the shipping costs again. Second option, they place a new order and I will ship the items for free with that new order. And then the final option was that I refunded them the charge of the nose to ear chains, but not of the actual shipping costs. So that's how I personally handled those complaints. Also, a great tip is to wear your own creations. If you don't like them, who else will? You have to be, first and foremost, your own biggest fan. I love wearing my nose to ear chains. I don't wear them enough, but I love wearing them. So it's very important that if you create something, that people see you with it. If you make custom phone cases, that you have a phone case of your own making around your phone, so that people know, like, hey, they have this really cool thing, they like using it, maybe I should get it too. And for me, the thing that has provided me the most sales is actually going to events while wearing my jewelry, because people will come and talk to me, ask me about my jewelry, I will give them one of my business cards, and then they will come to my Etsy store afterwards and order some things for themselves. So I think if you are your own fan, if you wear your creations, then it will show to people and people will get interested in your items and will be more likely to buy them. And then finally, something for the people who might not want to do this as a full-time job, but more as something small on the side, as I do, is keep it manageable. I don't have a whole lot of listings on my Etsy, and I do that on purpose because I get between 2 to 10 orders a week. And for me to be working on more than 10 orders a week would be not possible with my current working schedule. And for me personally, it's important that I can combine my full-time job with my YouTube channel and my Etsy. And that means having less listings, maybe selling less things, but keeping it manageable and keeping it a happy place for me. So these were my tips on selling on Etsy. I hope these were somewhat helpful for you and that the examples that I gave were clear enough. If you still have any questions at all, feel free to ask me in the comment section below. I will reply to you guys if I have a good answer, and otherwise I will refer you to the Etsy part that maybe could help you. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I make new videos every week, and if you don't want to miss a single one of them, be sure to hit that bell icon. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!